Miscoll with EMSNOW, and welcome to this edition of the Eric Miscoll Show. Our topic for discussion today will be the EMS industry in India. India, of course, as the second most populous country in the world and the third largest economy in Asia, has long attracted the attention of the industry. And so we're excited to get an update today from two industry stalwarts from India. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge and thank ESC India for their support in arranging this session today. ESC India, or by their full title, which is the Electronics and Computer Software Export Promotion Council of India, is an apex organization sponsored by the government of India with a mandate to promote global electronics and IT trade from India. ESC has a membership base of over 2,300 Indian ICT companies and works as a bridge between the industry and the government for various policy and promotional matters. So we thank them for their generosity in making some of their industry stars available to us today. Let me begin by briefly introducing our guests, and then we'll allow them to introduce themselves in greater detail. Joining us today, we have Mr. Sunil Vachani, who is the CEO of Dixon Technologies India. Dixon, of course, is the largest indigenous EMS company in India. We're also joined by Mr. Vinod Sharma, who's the Managing Director of Deki Electronics Limited. Deki is a passive component manufacturer, and there's other related industries, and I'll allow him to explain that in greater detail. So gentlemen, thank you both for the time today. Mr. Vachani, why don't we begin with you and ask you to introduce yourself and Dixon, please.
Thank you. So Rick, I founded Dixon about 30 years back, and we started off with just a single factory as an EMS company. And in a short period today, Dixon is the largest Indian electronic manufacturing services company. We are in diverse fields such as consumer electronics, home appliances, lighting, security systems, mobile phones, and of course, medical devices. We have 14 state-of-the-art plants spread across India, both in North India and South India, and we employ more than 15,000 people. We are also one of the few listed companies, EMS companies in India, both on the BSE and NSE. And the company is gradually transitioning from a pure EMS player to also an ODM player across all product categories. And then thank you for having me on the show today.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sharma, if we turn to you, sir.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for having me and Sunil with you today. I run a company called Deki Electronics Limited. We were founded in 1984. We started with a Japanese collaboration with a company called Okaya. We are today India's largest film capacitor manufacturer. In fact, if I recollect correctly, we have the second largest winding room in the world outside China at the moment. So we started at, in 80s, you had a license capacity to do something in India. You were only allowed to do that much. We had a license to do about 10 million capacitors per year. But today we do about 4 million per day. And it is my dream to take it to about 10 million a day. Wow. Yeah, so fondly, on a lighter way, we always say that we are benchmarking with Japan on the quality of capacitors, with Germany on the technology, with China on the price, and with India on payment behavior. So we managed to do that. I have 700 colleagues who help me do that.
That's also fantastic.
Yeah, we have a small incubated company within Deki that provides called Sure Solutions, that does solutions for the retail and industrial IoT sector. And I think both of them are booming at the moment. It's quite interesting what the solutions that electronics can bring to daily lives in different spheres. And 3 years ago, we set out on a diversification path in partnerships with others, because I realized that I'm not getting any younger and we need other people and other strengths to join us. So I did a partnership with a three-piece with a friend in Bangalore and a friend in Korea, South Korea. And the three of us got together to create a company called IPEC that does electric vehicle chargers now. We got into the EV space. And then IPEC did a further finished joint venture, 50% on drives, on electric drives. Basically, we're trying to get into the powertrain. We're now setting up a small company for battery management systems. So we are in that space. And with UK, we have a joint venture that does flexible solar cells. So again, it's something on a technology development area at the moment. So yeah, we are capacitors plus a few other things.
Wow, it's a very broad portfolio, isn't it? And I'd like to come back to that, but I just wanted to ask Sunil one question. You mentioned that movement from EMS to ODM. Really curious about that. What direction is that taking you in?
Yeah, I think we took a conscious decision about 7-8 years back that we cannot just be in prescriptive EMS manufacturing. And we strongly believe that India, the country's future and the industry's future lies in more design-led manufacturing. And a lot of our verticals, we have already moved to our own design-led manufacturing. So if you look at LED lighting, almost 95% of the sales that we do is completely ODM. We have a similar situation in home appliances like semi-automatic and fully automatic washing machines, where we completely designed our products and then we offer to our customers, we offer complete solutions to our customers. And sometimes it's also a JDM, which is a joint design product between the customer and us. But as I said, that the plan is and the vision is to move more and more to ODM, and we would be looking at offering our own solutions in product categories, even such as LED televisions and mobile phones in times to come, and probably even the IT hardware, which we've just, that's a journey we're just starting off on.
Okay. So just getting more involved in the IP and kind of moving up the value chain.
Absolutely. And also, I think trying to provide more value to the customers and being a bigger extension of customers. So if you look at product categories which are highly mature, the customer's ideally would not like to spend too much money on development of the products. So if you look at something like washing machines category, which was very, very mature, especially the semi-automatic. So there the customer expects you to design the product also besides offering the other services. And that's also one of the reasons of offering more value to the customers.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay.
Eric.
Yeah, let me, before we get into more of the knitting there about the industry, let me ask kind of general about the environment over there. Obviously, the pandemic is something that has challenged all industries across the globe for the last 18 months now. So I wanted to check in with both of you to find out kind of the impact that the COVID has had on your operations and where they stand today. Vinod, why don't we begin with you?
Yeah, Eric, so in India, I guess the pandemic is, of course, something that none of us in our lives were ever prepared for. I think in the first wave, if I speak for myself and my team at Deki, we were very brave. We kind of huddled together. We started talking to workers who had gone back, migrated back to their villages, kept in touch with them, and basically told them, hang in there. We don't know when we're going to open again. And I think we were out for about 7 weeks out of operations. And we were lucky to get back quite quickly because we were a 24-hour operation. Okay. The second wave, of course, was a complete shocker. We never ever imagined that this was going to be so bad. It really got personal with most people because you lost somebody you knew, a friend, a family, and hospital were not enough, and you fell short of oxygen in the city. So that was really, really a miserable phase. But fortunately, that was shorter-lived, in my opinion. So the lockdown was not as bad. It was just a couple of weeks, and we were back on our feet. However, supply chains are completely disrupted. So it's, you don't operate in silos anymore. So someone in the supply chain and the guy was, whichever, some weak link somewhere has a problem, and everybody has a problem. So we're just coming out of that now. I think in terms of business, I saw March and April of this year was a sudden spurt in demand. I don't know if Sunil experienced the same, but there was a high demand. But then June, July, August were kind of low. Now September we are coming back, and we are all keeping our fingers crossed that the third wave would either not be there across the country or would be very mild. So we're just hoping.
Okay. And Sunil, how was it for you as an EMS? Were you considered a critical industry?
Yeah, I think I would like to echo Vinod's sentiments. I think the first wave was definitely more severe as far as the business was concerned, because we had a complete lockdown across all industries. Only very few industries were allowed to open, and the second wave definitely had a bigger impact, a social impact in terms of loss of human lives, which was tragic, and also many of our colleagues also contracting the disease. So it was definitely very difficult times. But I think we as a country, we as an industry and as a company, I think shown that we are very resilient as human beings, and also as a country. And I think the great thing is that I think we've managed to bounce back very quickly. So if you look at, let's say, the production levels that we are having now, probably we are back to the pre-COVID levels. In some industries, it's even higher. We've seen a very, very sharp recovery as far as demand is concerned. And I think that goes across product verticals, whether it is consumer electronics or mobile phones or lighting. The only question is that we have to watch out and see as to how sustainable this recovery is because of the impending third wave that people talk about. But I think a lot of lessons have been learned that, God forbid, even if we get into now a third wave, I think the solution is not a complete lockdown. The solution is to look at regionalized and local solutions rather than an all industry or all kind of countrywide solution.
And what's the vaccination rate looking like over there? I mean, that's obviously another factor that's pushing the opportunity to be less dependent on lockdowns. Where is that within your organizations and generally across the population?
So I think as a country, the last few days we've had record vaccinations in the last few days, more than 11 million vaccinations a day, and I think the government has set a target that by December, most of the adult population would be vaccinated. And even I think in our company now, of course, we are ensuring that we're organizing camps across our factories all over India. We're tying up with local hospitals. We're ensuring that the new people who join have the certificate. So we're really encouraging and pushing people to get this done fast. And it's very encouraging signs that the initial hesitancy which was there, for the vaccination, that at least what we are seeing in our organization is disappearing. So that's very positive.
Yeah. And same for you, Vinod?
Yeah, I mean, as an industrial unit, both our units, we are 100% vaccinated. But some of them got only one vaccine yet. So it's their turn. I think within a month, they will all be double vaccinated.
Yeah.
So now we're trying to make sure that their families are all also in the net.
Yeah, absolutely. The well-being of the kind of the business and the family beyond it is very, very important. Just as the other elephant in the room at the moment in terms of disruption is the component shortages, and certainly in Europe and the US, that's the topic that everybody's talking about at the moment. How is that being felt in India? Vinod, you're a component supplier, so you're kind of on one side of it. How's it affecting you? Is that your spike in demand?
So in terms of semiconductor, the story is well known. I think we were all caught napping, as an industry, both on the component side, and I think our friends in the auto are already beginning to suffer. Our largest car company has the last month only has scaled down their production to 40% of their normal production. So it's very badly hit, and it's a pity that it's such a small component. It forms such a small part of the BOM. In some other industries like in LED, and Sunil will talk a little bit about that. I'm sure that some of those semiconductor shortages are now beginning to mean that people are redesigning. In some cases, we're going back to designs that can be done without semiconductors, for example, or lesser usage of semiconductors. In some parts of the circuit are going back to being analog wherever possible. It's not possible in all cases.
Yeah, the other thing I'm curious about, Vinod, from your point of view, from a supplier's point of view, is if they can't get the semiconductor on the bill of materials, are they slowing down the orders for the passives that are on that same BOM?
Yeah, so it's being slowed down, and what is really hurting everybody is that it's an unpredictable slowdown. So everybody hopes, especially it's not always the brands that we deal with. We deal with EMS companies like Sunil, for example, is a big customer. And his team would not really know which semiconductors are going to land up when, and what will be the changes that they will make because of that. So passives that help or protect those semiconductors would also change, And what is adding to our challenges is that our own supply chains are actually quite, so it's not just semiconductors, and that's a misgiving we have in the industry. A lot of other components, a lot of other commodities are going through a very similar thing. So for example, in film capacitors specifically, if you look at polypropylene, the base film that we use, 2 factories were shut down. One was relocating in the world. The Texas freeze was, partly blamed for it. I don't know how much it was actually. So the commodity prices of stuff like that has gone up 40 to 60% in the last 6 months. And I just find, I was joking with my team that in 30 years, we will only know one discussion with our customer is price down every quarter. And now for the last 2 quarters, we have to talk this language of price increase. And, our own suppliers are saying, look, you block the quantities. I don't know what the price is going to be in October or November.
Yeah.
And obviously that's not a language that I can speak with Sunil and his team. So we're learning new tricks now.
Well, it's tough conversations that you've got to have, isn't it? And it's between the purchasing teams, and it kind of underlines the importance of those open, honest communication channels and partnerships where you actually understand what each other's businesses are like. Sunil, how has it been for you and your team through this process?
Firstly, I'll pretend I didn't hear what Vinod said, or 2 words of price.
They just don't go together, do they?
Absolutely, especially when you're on the other side of the table. Yeah. So I think, it's had a huge impact as far as operations are concerned. I think the kind of volumes that one has done, record volumes of sales that we did coming out of the pandemic, the sales would have been much, much higher had it not been for those shortages. But I think if I look back, it's kind of a mixed impact, because if we look at our ODM businesses, what it's meant is, the bigger investment in the working capital, longer cycles. But as far as the EMS business is concerned, what we've seen is that our large customers have been able to pull in a lot of material. It's not had that kind of impact on them. So I think that way it's kind of balanced out. But I think what this has taught us that as a country, we need to be self-reliant, or we call Atmanirbhar in India. And I think the one positive thing that has come out of it is that there's a huge realization within the industry and the government that we need to create a strong and robust component ecosystem, whether it's for the passives or for the semiconductors. And I think we have a new team in the Ministry of Electronics led by the Minister of State as well as Cabinet Minister. And I think there is a huge effort and outreach that is happening to try and get the large investors into the country investing into the component ecosystem.
Yeah.
Now, is that part of the, when I think of India, I think I did my first market research study on the electronics manufacturing in India about, 20 years ago, it seems like. And, so I've been watching it progress and grow and there's always been a lot of, but I'm also aware that within India, there's certain government initiatives, and Sunil, I think you were just referring to that. One is the Make in India that's been around for quite a while, but more recently, the whole, the PLI, the production linked incentives for the large scale. Speak to those. Can you tell us how those are being leveraged to benefit the industry over there?
Yeah. So I think there is no doubt that in the last 2 years, there have been excellent initiatives that have come out from the government. And I think I must congratulate Vinod for that. He also heads our CII ICT committee. And I think this is definitely a result of a deep engagement between the industry and the government. And I think if I were to name some of the initiatives, there was the MSIP scheme, which was basically give a capital subsidy. Then there's a specs, which was also encouraging investment in the components. But I think the most path-breaking and the game-changing scheme has been the PLI, which is production-linked incentive scheme. So what it does is it basically gives an incentive to companies which are making new investments, capital investments with a certain threshold. And also the incentive is available on the incremental sales and the base year being financial year 1920. I'm talking about at least the mobile phone and the component scheme. Now, why I say this is the game changer, because one, it is helping the Indian industry create a large scale, which is required to be competitive in the global markets. It's also encouraging, building Indian champions, because there's a different track for Indian companies and a different track for foreign companies. So if you look at, let's say, just to give you an example, like a mobile phone category, the foreign companies get incentives on a certain value, let's say which is $250 and above for the mobile phones, and Indian companies can get incentive on any of the phones that they manufacture. So there is a separate track for Indian companies. The idea is to build Indian champions so that they can grow up in the next 5 years and really compete in the global markets. And also, I think most importantly, the PLI is also encouraging the creation of a component ecosystem, which is badly required.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that whole supply chain thing's and supply chain resilience, supply chain security, localization, regionalization of supply chains huge. Vinod, how do you see it from your side?
Yeah, so if I may add to that discussion, if we step back a little bit, what is it that we are trying to do in this industry? Then I'd like to go back, in 1998, it was when India signed the Information Technology Agreement 1. And this was an age where globalization was, was the mantra, and everybody was jumping onto this bandwagon without, in my opinion at least, really understanding the implications of what it's going to do. So what it did to a country like India, and I might say to most developing countries, is that, by the nature of our economies, while we have some economies, let's say, benefits to our economy because of low labor cost, but everything else, factors of manufacturing in a country like India were higher, whether that's the energy cost, the availability of 100%, 24/7 electricity, the logistics, your ports, your connectivity to the roads, airports, etc., or even bureaucratic issues like customs and clearances and the time it takes for things to be turned around, and most importantly, the cost of finance. Typically when we're talking of, forget 98, but by 2005, when the electronics industry largely went to a zero import duty, your finance costs were typically 14-15% per annum at that point of time. And so what it did is you kind of flattened the whole competitive field and said you need to manufacture in these circumstances, but be globally competitive, because there will be no tariff protection whatsoever. And we were not really a great practitioner of non-tariff protection. I'm happy we were not, because we really wanted to be out there. And the fruits of that we are bearing today. So we went through what you might describe, at least 15 years of a lot of agony. And people like Sunil, myself, a lot of other colleagues, we call ourselves survivors, because, from a tariff protection of 40% going down to 0% on almost all components and many products, and try to compete with what is happening, for example, in my opinion, the most robust supply chain ever in the world in China. So they were giving everybody a hard time as far as competition is concerned. But I think some of us that decided that we should learn from this and do what we can. So what Sunil said, I would echo that, hats off to the government of the day, because they were able to, in a zero duty environment where WTO does not allow you to do many things in favor of localized manufacturing, we've been able to find schemes that are WTO compliant, that are good for everybody, that have attracted people like the Apples and the Samsungs and the Xiaomis of the world to start establishing very large manufacturing in India. And, of course, the challenge still remains, where how do we trickle this down? How do we broaden this, as our minister said the other day, not only mobile phones, but how do we take it to security devices, to drones, to robotics, to medical equipment, for example, but also how do we dig deeper in terms of the component base? And obviously, if you try to do something extraordinary for components, it should happen in a way that it does not hurt the people above in the value chain in terms of protection for our final finished products or for EMS. So it's still a challenge ahead, but I think some great steps have been taken. So in the last 3 years, the mood is completely positive now, finally.
So I'm curious.
A very solid foundation.
Yeah, I'm curious how much of, when you're talking about the growth and what's happening, how much of that is for domestic consumption versus export? And, so the component, we also have the EMS, so it's a little different, but maybe Sunil, how much of yours with Dixon there is internal?
Sure. Yeah, I think if we look at some of the product categories like mobile phones, so we have set up new manufacturing capacities in the NCR region, which is next to Delhi. So recently we set up a new production capacity for almost 12 million smartphones a year. And we're setting up another factory for about 25 million per annum. And we believe that about 60% of this is going to be exports and 40% of the domestic market. But I think if we look at the overall industry and the kind of commitments that were made in the PLI applications, about 40% roughly would go for exports in the long run, and 60% would be for the domestic market.
Interesting. Vinod, how does it with you, with your business?
Yeah, Eric, so the interesting figure is that, we were grappling with the sector, actually, if you look at electronics as a vertical, we are actually the second largest contributor to the trade deficit of India. So oil is the first one. There is no way that we can replace that in a hurry. And then the second one is largely electronics. The whole chapter heading on tariffs of 84, 85. Obviously the right concern first is, I wouldn't want to use the word import substitution, but there is still a very large domestic market that needs to be fed domestically. And however, fortunately, this is an industry of scale. It's an industry of supply chain integration. So you have, if you really want to be competitive, you have no choice but to make in India, but make for the world. While we would like to do that, we understand we are not alone. We're not the only girl in town. There are other people who are competing for that same space. So I think it's a very interesting journey. The per capita GDP consumption of electronics in India, for example, is still about a quarter of the world's average. We are at about $60, $70 per capita. The world is at about $300 plus. So we still have a lot of catch up to do as our populations move into from lower middle class to upper middle class or middle class, whatever you call it. There is a lot of electronic consumption, and the COVID was, of course, we saw the spurt in demand that can happen in this area. So there's a lot of reason for us to look at this, both for domestic and we keep reminding the government, any policy that promotes only domestic or only export would be a big mistake. So we need to make sure that both can happen seamlessly. And the other bit I'd like to add on that is that we're also realizing that electronics is not a vertical anymore. It's a horizontal meta resource, an enabler for all the other industries, for lives and livelihoods, as we call it. So the impact of this on digitization, on governance, on making people's lives easy in terms of getting a passport, for example, et cetera, et cetera. So that it has very deep ramifications. So
there's a technology backbone, isn't there?
Yeah, like a rollout of optical fiber network happening to the villages. And so you can imagine, and we still remind ourselves that 60% of our population lives in villages. So we are up for some very interesting play.
Yeah, and it's an interesting development journey, isn't it? And I think when you look at the opportunity, and we all know the EMS space very, very well. When you look at the opportunity in the EMS space, there's a few factors that need to be in place, and you certainly talked about one of them, which is having the supply chain around you and having the support. Another is having the labor resource, and another is having the technology. So I'm kind of curious where you are on those two in terms of training and skill availability, but also on that whole digital transformation phase. So the opportunity is there when you're building an industry to build better, to build something more advanced, to build something that's got more automation, more autonomy in it. How's that part of the journey going in India, Sunil?
Yeah, I think first you talked about the opportunity, and I think Vinod also raised a very valid point that I think the first priority is that the complete domestic demand that is there, which is extremely large, needs to be met through local manufacturing. So I think the first signs are extremely positive. I think if you look at the total demand of ICT products, it's roughly about $140 billion in the country last year. And I think the encouraging sign is that almost $75 billion was at least manufactured in India, the first level of manufacturing. So I think going forward, the priority is that now the component ecosystem needs to come in place, and also the design-led manufacturing needs to happen in India. But at least the first step has been taken. And I think if you look at the export opportunity, it's even bigger. If you look at, I think our country, a country like Vietnam, which is much smaller in size, they do an export of almost $90 billion worth of ICT products. Whereas our exports, I think, was hardly about $12 to $13 billion last year. So if we look at, let's say, one category like mobile phone itself, we believe as a country, we can export about $100 billion worth of mobile phones in the next 5 years. And that's what the PLI scheme talks about. So I think there is no doubt that as an industry and as a country, we are sitting on a huge, huge opportunity. And we need to go out there and make sure that it happens, and India does become the hub for manufacturing. Your next question on the plans for Industry 4.0 and automation and digitization. I think any initiative that one has to take, and we believe as a company, should be looked at that how that initiative can add more value to the customer. And that initiative, is it really helping the company be more agile? Is it helping the company become a larger extension of the customer? So I think every decision of the company needs to be focused on these particular issues. But I think the realization is coming that if we need to add value to our customers, if we need to be more agile, if we need to be more informed when we take our decisions, it's extremely important that we do invest in tools such as MES and automation and digitization. So I think as a company, we're already doing that, and the positive news is it is also happening in the industry at a broader level.
Mm-hmm.
And is it incentivized? Are there digital transformation incentives from the government? Vinod, you're nodding your head. Is that in agreement or in concern?
Yeah, no, so not enough to answer a short answer. Are we doing enough in that area? Not yes, but let me pick up your question on skilling a little more in detail. So if you look at skilling across, and we have a very interesting spectrum. So if you look at design, including semiconductor design, Indian talent is available and is serving some of the best semiconductor firms in the world sitting out of India. ST Micro, TI, I mean, you name them, and Intel for that matter. Everybody has design houses in India, and each one has anywhere upwards of 5,000 engineers designing those circuits. So on the one hand, the high end of the spectrum, we have the capabilities, the skills, though we don't do our own products as yet, not really in any large numbers. The middle one, of which we would call the EMS space, very interesting because a lot of these very large EMS companies and companies like Sunils, and these are the future Flexes and the future Foxcons of the world. So they are using a lot of people, unfortunately, including women, on assembly operations. Easy to skill, give them a livelihood, give them a life of respect and dignity, and some wonderful work is happening in that area. When you come to the component space, this is where we have a big difficulty, because components need very highly specialized skills. The person who's worked on ferrites obviously is of no use to somebody in passives, for example, or on PCBs. So the skilling at both the worker level, the shop floor level, and at the engineering level, we need a lot to do. The first steps have been taken. We have a National Skill Development Council that has nudged industry associations to come together and create the national occupancy standards around stuff, and also create qualification tracks, training partners, qualification partners. So the infrastructure of skilling is coming across. I think where we are still not, that skilling level is not being good enough for entrepreneurs like us to say, I'm only going to take people who are skilled through these centers, and I'm not going to pick up people from the street yet. So that switch needs to happen still. I think we are a few years away from that happening. But you touched upon a very, very interesting point, because I think every country has a reason to be at the high table. And our reason is not great finance. While all that is happening, the great fintech enterprises coming up and the valuations going up, the participation of stock markets, and Sunil can talk a lot more about it with authority. He's recently done very, very well in that area. But I think that our reason to be at the high table will be skills, will be people. As Eric said in the opening show, we are soon going to be the most populous country in the world. And I think we should use it to our advantage. We are not doing enough today.
Yeah.
You mentioned PCBs in there. Are there PCB fabs indigenous within India?
Yes. So a lot of course, single layer, double layer is being done in India. Some metal clad PCBs are being done. But the moment you look at, for example, high density PCB for mobile phones, not yet. But the good news there again is that some very large houses like Tata's, the House of Tata's, the House of Reliance. So some of these very large players are now taking a very serious look at the electronics industry and making some inroads in that area. So we are hopeful that next time we have this conversation in a couple of years, you'll probably have a Tata on your show or one of the Reliance guys on this show.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating when you see the industry develop. Sunil, Vinod mentioned markets, access to capital. What's the climate like for that at the moment? And not just for companies like yourself and the IPO opportunities and those kind of things, but what about venture capital, startup capital? Is there a good amount of that available?
Yeah, so I think there is no doubt a lot has changed in the last 3 years since we went public. And I normally tell Vinod about this, that I remember when we were going on our roadshows for for our IPO, we reached out to potential investors, both in the domestic and the international markets. We had a huge problem, convincing them about the India story, about the India story as far as electronic manufacturing is concerned. I was personally out there, for almost 3 months on the road, and it was a huge struggle. But I think the fortunate thing is that there is a realization that India is likely to become the next hub for manufacturing. There are huge strengths that we have. There is a lot of government support behind making this happen. So I think that is resulting in a lot of now interest coming in from existing investors as well as potential investors in companies like us, which is just coming up and wanting to set up their manufacturing in India. But I think what needs to change is that a lot of the SMEs are still finding it difficult to raise capital and put in money into the ecosystem. And I think Vinod talked about this point of, let's say even the basic things like bare PCBs. It's a struggle to source these large numbers in India. And I think if we look at, let's say a country like China, we believe a large part of the ecosystem, of the component ecosystem, especially the passives and things like bare PCBs, is the SMEs or the MSMEs, right? Which I think in India is a bit of a problem, because for these companies to set up shop, to get money, to get loans, or to get raise capital in the markets is still a problem. So this is something that we are engaged with the government, and let's hope that things improve on this front in times to come. And especially also in design-led manufacturing. Indian banks have traditionally had a history that, first thing when you go and ask them, they ask for a collateral, right? And design companies do not have a model of making money in the first few years. They lose money for many years, as we know. Mm-hmm. And also they are not in a position to offer any collaterals. So it's very, very difficult for design-led companies or, startup companies in this sector to raise capital. So I think this is something that we as an industry and the country need to work upon.
Yeah, it's really important, isn't it? Because if you look at some of the talent drain you've got some great Indian entrepreneurs disappearing off to Silicon Valley, raising millions in venture capital and having very successful businesses over there that are employing Americans and not finding their way back to India. So what do you do as a business as you look to move from the EMS space to a company that is more ODM based, has more intellectual property? What do you have a strategy to work with small and medium-sized businesses, with startups to develop ideas?
So I think there is no doubt in our minds that if India has to emerge as a next hub for manufacturing, we need a very, very strong and vibrant component ecosystem. So we are working with our partners, with the industry, to make sure that it happens, encouraging more and more of our partners to come and invest money. Because I think it's important that the companies which set up shop in India, as far as the component ecosystem is concerned, that they have that world-class scale, right? You cannot be just looking at the domestic markets, if you have to invest in components. So we are working with them, and I think what is extremely encouraging is that let's say the last 2 PLIs that have come in, the schemes that have come in for the sectors such as lighting and air conditioners, the entire corpus of almost about $1.2 billion has gone into incentivizing component manufacturing. So I think we'll see more and more component manufacturers coming in, and hopefully that ecosystem will develop over a period of time.
Yeah.
I'd kind of piggyback off of what Phil just asked there about, the talent that might be leaving and going to the United States. But then I think traditionally, if you look at throughout Asia, Japan, Korea, China, right, you had that same phenomenon where they went, but then they came back, and they came back with contacts and with business savvy, and a desire to build that indigenous. And I'm wondering if you're seeing any of that yet, or are there expats returning, so to speak, and growing industries yet? So Vinod, do you see any?
Not enough as yet, I would say. There are some people who came back in components and EMS, but very few. We are hoping that now, the government is also paying a lot of attention to the semiconductor space. And in semiconductors, you're absolutely right. A lot of our talent is in the US. We need them. We need those connections, and we need their access to technology and finance. And you're absolutely right. I mean, something like a Taiwan Semiconductor Corporation was born out of something like this. Having said that, at least it's my personal view that today we are also moving to an era where the collaborations don't have to be only with because Indians returning back home. They can be with anybody. So, people are finding the elephant in the room always in these discussions is the China plus one, or the de-risking or whatever name you want to give it. And as in India, we find ourselves in a position that if we play our cards right, the industry and the government together, we should be able to invite and welcome a lot of that investment. And as you were pointing out a little earlier, not everything is our strong point. So, for example, technology, we may not be the strongest, at least for a semiconductor technology, as an example, or design. But access to capital, we are probably not the best, still not the lowest cost of capital in the world. So I think this is great play for collaboration. Our own company, that's what we've done in the last 3 years. You try to pick the best you can. The market is very large in India. That's what attracts people to begin with. And as Sunil pointed out earlier, if for Vietnam, with that kind of a small market, can become an export base for $90 billion, any of us who's doing anything less than $100 billion should really be scratching our heads and saying, what are we doing? Why are we letting this happen?
Now, you referenced the China plus one there. I'm curious, are you seeing any manufacturing, and maybe Sunil, this is for you primarily, are you seeing any manufacturing that is transitioning from a China base to an India base currently?
Yeah, I think if you look at, let's say, a sector like mobile phone itself, we've seen a huge amount of investments coming in to this sector, and especially after the PLI scheme was launched. Large ecosystems of leading brands have set up huge capacity. And we believe that this production capacities that they've set up in India is not only going to be for the domestic market, but also going to be servicing the international market. So it's obvious that what they were doing from, let's say, another country now is part of it, at least, is shifting to India. But I think what is important is that these large brands and large ecosystems also bring their component vendors into India and encourage partnerships with local companies. Because I think, creation of a component ecosystem is going to be much faster if we build on those partnerships. So I think as the government, I'm sure, is also aware of it, and they're also working on it. And as an industry, we also need to work on those partnerships to get the component ecosystem now that the finished product assembly is at least happening in India for those large brands. But to answer your question, yes, we see across product categories, whether it is mobile phones or lighting or appliances, is definitely moving to India.
Okay. Good.
Does that explain your staggeringly successful stock price this year? You've had an amazing year. Yeah, is that just pure growth, or? Yeah, I think as a promoter, you have to just try and create value for your investors and for the customers. The valuation is in the in the hands of the investors, so there's not really much that we do about it. But yes, obviously, I think as a company, we always try and our best to build that trust of our stakeholders, whether it's our customers or investors. De-risk the business, getting to more product categories, acquire large marquee customers, build that scale, and we hope, and also invest in design-led manufacturing and backward integration. And we hope that that is recognized by the investors. And I'm very happy that it has been in the last 2 years. And going forward, I think what has brought us here obviously is not going to get us there if we want to. So we hope that what we do in the coming years will also be appreciated by the investors. Yeah, and it kind of underlines the confidence in the Indian market as well, doesn't it? And what you're doing as an industry. So it's it's obviously important on a company basis, but I think it's important on an industry basis to see investor confidence in the manufacturing space. So
excellent. Listen, gentlemen, I am aware of the time, and I told you we wouldn't steal too much of your morning there because I know you have full business days ahead of you. So maybe in wrapping it, let me ask you just kind of about your view for the future as you're looking forward over the next 3-4 quarters. What's your view of the electronics industry and the development there in India? And Vinod, maybe I start with you on that, sir.
So as Sunil was saying, we've seen success actually in one large vertical so far. That's mobile phones and some components. This needs to spread now, and we see the next 3-4 years. This is happening to, as you mentioned, the air conditioning, LEDs, specific verticals or sub-verticals being picked up from a policy perspective. But let's remember that policy cannot drive everything. So from a market perspective, again, we see a lot of movement. I see another trend that hopefully will begin to gather more pace now, which is EMS companies also coming to India, larger companies coming into India in spaces beyond mobile, but also component manufacturers. So either they come on their own, or some of them find India not such an easy place to do business. There are component companies in India that can become their partners. So the auto industry is always a good industry to learn trends from. And the auto industry did this, where we have a lot of partnerships and cross holdings between large buyers and their key component suppliers. It has not happened enough, in my opinion, in the electronics anywhere in the world. And I do see some green shoots, some early signs of that happening. So like an electronic manufacturing company, you're talking of contract manufacturing of components beginning to happen in India.
Good. Sunil, how do you see it?
Yeah, I think we in the industry, and I think in the country also, are hugely excited by the opportunity that is in front of us. In spite of the large numbers that we do in the country, the consumption that happens in the country of key items like mobile phones and LED televisions, the penetration levels of these products are still very, very low. I'm sure you've heard of the numbers, but if you look at, let's say, category like LED televisions, hardly 15% of the population owns an LED television, and it's even lower if you go across product categories like appliances or air conditioners or washing machines. So just the domestic market itself, I think we can look forward to huge growth in times to come. And we believe what is consumed in India, what is going to be consumed in India, will be manufactured in India. And on top of that, as I mentioned, there is this large opportunity that is there for exports. The numbers that we have right now are minuscule. And I think there is no doubt that we'll have a larger share of the global markets in times to come. But I think what is very critical for the industry is to look at that, the government has given us a window of 5 years with this PLI scheme. And the PLI scheme, we know that Vinod talked about, compensates the manufacturers for the disabilities.
Yep.
What is extremely important is that we use these 5 years very productively and build strengths and competitiveness to ensure that after 5 years, we do not need any subsidies. We are completely self-reliant. We can do our own designs and export out of the country without any government dependence. So I think now the ball is in our court, in the industry's court, to ensure that we invest in manufacturing, scaling up, we invest in design, we invest in creating a component ecosystem and lots of other things. And also the government also needs to play its part to ensure that these disabilities that we talked about in terms of finance costs, logistics, etc., do also go away. So I think come up, there's an opportunity, large opportunity, but I think we need to get our act together and we need to focus on the task in front of us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating, isn't it? It feels like you've got all the raw ingredients there, and they're really clear. You've got potentially a hugely growing domestic market. You're working on infrastructure. You're working on the component supply chain. Building out that technology roadmap, the skills roadmap, and all of that is moving in the right direction. But you're absolutely right, Sunil, that it's one of those things, I think, where we've been talking about India as a potential market for a long time. Now's the time to step on the gas and make it happen, not just wait for these subsidies to run out. So yeah, I think it's moving forward at speed is what's required, and also telling your story on an international stage. But having spoken to you guys today, I feel much more positive about the opportunity there. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I just want to echo that, because I must say it's very informative. I think your insights what's happening over there have been superb, and I clearly see why you were put forward as some speakers for us to engage with for this, because you're both very good representatives of the industry there. So I want to thank you for that. I'm hoping that maybe we can get some updates as we move forward, because we're keenly interested as this moves forward. You know, we're going to continue to cover the industry and try to report on that, and hopefully as things move forward, we can stay in touch and get other updates again, because you gentlemen are excellent. So I just want to say thank you very much for your time. I wish continued success and